Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, the co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Chris, I want to visit with you today, and we want to talk about political correctness and what's going on, and freedom of speech and the First Amendment, because there's a lot of noise out there and a lot of talk, and I think there's a bit of confusion too. And that, of course, is dealing with the First Amendment, which is a pretty important amendment. There was a time, at the origination of the country that we didn't need anything like the Bill of Rights because everything was supposed to be left to the states and don't even emphasize this in detail. Anyway, they wrote the Bill of Rights, and of course, the first phrase in the First Amendment is the Congress shall write no laws. And I think that's pretty good. And then they go on and start listing them. And we're so far removed from Congress shall write no laws on this subject that the political correctness and the speech police and all that we can do or can't do is so out of control that a lot of people don't know what's going on. But the political correctness is something else because they've sort of taken over the legal forces. But the original intent of the First Amendment was to protect several specific rights: freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and also the whole idea of petitioning the government. And these were to be protected, but all of them could be defended by property rights, whether it's the press or whether it's the religion or whether it's whatever we do, we have to use property. And if you had absolute right of your own property, it could be guided that way. But we're a long way off from that. I think the 14th Amendment helped to change that because when this was written, they really intended not to be a federal police, even if there were infractions. And to define this, it was supposed to be worked out by the states, but that's been a long time gone. But now it's overkill because it's morphed into dictating speech, hate speech, and hate crimes. And they're arbitrary and subjective. So we have a bit of a mess in understanding this First Amendment. And I'm sure you've thought about this whole issue of the First Amendment and how important it is.
Yes, and Congress shall make no law. That's pretty. It's very understandable to me. No laws. However, as you said, we're very far from that, and I'm going to compliment what you said about property. We have freedom of speech, which is basically freedom of thought, but it also is tied to where you can have freedom of speech. You can't just barge into someone's house, start yelling political slogans, and then claim freedom of speech. You have freedom of speech on your own property, say whatever you want, or if you go to another property owner and he allows you to say whatever you want, that's where your freedom of speech comes in. And you're free to criticize government. That was part of the Bill of Rights. It's actually the whole purpose so that you don't have a tyranny. But today we have people going into supermarkets and laying down in supermarkets, protesting the NRA. This is a total violation of property rights, and maybe someday somebody will barge in our house with their political slogans. But let's hope it never gets that far.
And then it's morphed over into this idea that your rights are being offended. If you're offended that somebody abused your rights, nobody's allowed to be offended. And so they have to regulate speech, and they do this all the time. I've often been critical of the issue of hate crimes. And of course, crimes are horrible and people should be punished, and hate is a factor, but hate happens to be subjective. And I often wondered why, if you're convicted of a crime and they say, well, he hated this person and therefore we have to give him a greater penalty, doesn't that mean if there was something that you couldn't call a hate crime, the person was not punished as much? So if they both committed the same crime, why would you have a group of people not getting the same amount of punishment instead of saying, oh, he's a hateful person, so we're going to punish him for 20 years instead of 10 years? So it didn't make any sense because they've introduced this notion of subjectivity and that they're going to regulate speech. And that has led to a real mess for us. But I think what people fail to realize that in a free society, you do have a right to criticize, and you mentioned that, Chris, our government, we have a right to speak out, but you also have a right to be rude to people. What? You can be rude to people? Yes, you do. And that person that's being, rude to has a right to, just forget it and get rid of this guy. Stay away from him if they're going to be rude. But this whole idea that government's going to come in and teach people to be polite and courteous, I think that's a fallacy. They're trying to build character and virtue by saying if we have enough of these PC regulations that we're going to make everybody virtuous. And to do that, they have to destroy liberty. But for the most part, sometimes that's just an excuse to promote their agenda, and saying, well, you can't say this and this because that's not nice, and therefore they want to regulate it, but they're really out promoting their agenda. And that too often is what that we're dealing with and the problems that we have.
Yeah, and they're trying to make something that is subjective objective, meaning they're trying to define what is offensive and what is not. And we're seeing it almost every day in the press. Somebody says something, they're bound to offend someone else, and now they're forced to apologize, which is why the title of our show is Who's Apologizing Today? But being offended is a choice. I mean, we get thousands of comments every single day on all of our social media and everywhere. And like, some people are rude, but it's up to us if we're going to be offended by it. Somebody, we don't have to be offended at all. We don't have to accept their opinion, but everybody has a right to their own opinion. They don't have to buy our ideas. We're just putting them out there, and with the hope that some people will buy them. And that's it. That's a sign of freedom if people are disagreeing with you.
This idea of a forced apology, I think, is just a joke. I mean, what good is an apology if somebody's forcing you to do it, or intimidating you, or threatening you? You'll lose your job, or you're going to lose this, or all kinds of problems that come up if you don't apologize. And the other irony is that, say, 100 years ago, some people were mistreated by the government. Now, the official thing is that the current generation has to apologize, to go on their knees. It's almost like a confession, and apologize for it. You can condemn it and criticize it and do this sort of thing, but the official apology is what they're looking for. And I think they see this as a confession that they've won the fight. But it's on both sides. Everybody has to apologize. But you apologize for that. The only apology that's worth anything is the one that comes instantaneously, spontaneously, and it's very sincere. For instance, like if you bump into the person, you say you're sorry and you make amends. But this whole idea that if it involves politics, oh, I'm sorry I said that, I'm sorry I did this, I think it's political correctness gone wild, and yet it happens every single day. It's happening right now because if the media supports one side over the other one and they get caught at it, then they'll say, well, you better apologize, It's back and forth on these apologies. And even if you do apologize, what if you're not sincere? What good is it? Other than supporting the authoritarians. Aha, I made him apologize, I won. Then they go on to the next thing that they're going to accuse somebody else. So I don't think these apologies mean very much.
Yeah, and this goes back to, we've mentioned it several times on the show, it's called cultural Marxism. There's some people out there, and it goes back decades, that really want to see freedom abolished. And what they wanted to do is divide and conquer, separate people into this group, that group. You're a member of all these groups, you may not even know it. And then you foment discord between the groups. So everybody's divided and arguing, and then guess who swoops in with their authoritarian laws? The government, and that's how you get conquered, by divide and conquer. Put people into groups, have them fight with one another, and then come in and regulate their lives away.
Well, and I think a good example of that is when these tragedies happen at the school and people do get killed, which is a real problem, is the Marxists and the culturists come in and they blow this so high that they're willing to repeal the First Amendment and repeal the Second Amendment and just march in and take over and promote something else, whether it's their Marxism or communism or whatever it is. It's just used as an excuse. So that is a very difficult problem to deal with, because you don't want to try to close people down. I think, for instance, the frustration I feel about the internet. There was a time when I thought the internet, it was miraculous, and it really is, because what we can use the internet for in spreading our message and looking up information, I think is fantastic. But there's also an authoritarian approach to those who run the internet, the social networks, because they can pick and choose, and they can be critical. They can redirect our information, our program, or not redirect it, and they say, well, we don't want you spreading any bad ideas. And you think, well, do they have a right to do that? And you say, well, it's a private company. It's sort of like a newspaper. The newspapers can publish anything they want, and they have to be protected. So that's the immediate reaction of a libertarian. But the truth is, the social networks aren't exactly private companies. They were established with the blessings of government. They serve as an arm of government. They turn over all their information to the government. And I think it's different. And so it's not as easily to have the problem solved. All we can do is try to compete with them, because in some ways, if you have your own website, you don't want people posting on that website that totally and completely contradicts, and it's vulgar and all these things. So we do edit that. So there is the right of property to edit it. But what my concern is, as soon as the government gets involved, then it's representing the government, and it's not as easy to sort all this out.
Yeah, Dr. Paul, I'll finish with something that's very basic and obvious, but it's called for these days, unfortunately, and that's that every one of us, we see the world from our own perspective. There is nobody else like myself out in this world, even though there's 7 billion people that can see through my eyes, make my own opinions and value judgments. So, and that's all 7 billion of us live that way. So what's the best way for 7 billion distinct, unique people that interpret the world their own way to live? And we believe that it's to live with liberty. Think, say, do what you want, as long as it's on your property or somebody that allows you to use their property, and no aggression. You can't keep your hands off of other people and their stuff, and allow them to have their own opinions, whether you agree with them or not.
Right. I think that's perfect. No lie, cheating, stealing, and harm to other people would solve a lot of our problems. But I think one of the understandings that we have to deal with this problem is that when you have a big government getting bigger and bigger and more intrusive, the only concern they have is keeping their power. They lose their ability to really solve the problems, and we're approaching that because our middle class is getting wiped out, and there's a financial hurricane standing out there. But when you're critical of the economic system and the people who are making all the money and control the economic power, they don't want to hear the truth about the Federal Reserve. The same way with foreign policy. If you say the foreign policy has nothing to do with defending our country or protecting our freedoms or our constitution, they don't want to hear it. That type of truth is treasonous to the dictatorships. And in the empire, they do not want to hear that, so they just turn it into a lie, and those people get into trouble. I wanted to use one or two examples, if I could, about how this works out, because we've heard a lot about Kaepernick, the football player who wouldn't kneel, and he was demonstrating. And if you believe him, and there's no reason for me not to believe him, he was complaining about something we on this station complain about, and that's police brutality and the mistreatment of minorities, especially with the arrest of the drug war. So we know exactly what he's talking about. But is he on the right side of that issue by taking it on and demonstrating on somebody else's time and on somebody else's property and causing this? And I say he doesn't. He can do it on his own time. The one thing about football that I have a complaint about is they're subsidized by the government. They get their stadiums built by the taxpayers, people who never go and watch the football games, and they have the military pay paying, these companies a lot of money to demonstrate and provide the militarism to pump up our foreign policy. That's what I find very intrusive into our freedoms. But I don't think the individual has the right on somebody else's time to demonstrate on their property. That doesn't have any violation of the First Amendment rights of that individual. If that individual is given permission to do that and there's no penalty, what you've done is taken away the property rights of the person that he works for and whatever the contract is. This most recent example of people bringing up the First Amendment, doesn't Roseanne Barr have a right to say whatever she wants? Yeah, she does. Well, isn't she being overly punished? Not really, because she has contracts, and there's probably something in a contract that if you get out of hand and really destroy the image of the individuals doing this, usually there's a reason given that you can get out of these contracts. It's in their best interest. So it's a legal thing, but it has nothing to do with the First Amendment rights. If she's just talking about the benefits of free markets over communism, and she's doing this at an outside setting, and it's a controversial economic issue, she should have a right to do that and all. But this certainly wasn't a challenge to her First Amendment right. The big thing is it's been held, and you still hear the politicization of it, and that is who's going to apologize and how's it going to be handled? Will liberals be handled the same way as the conservatives are handled? And it goes back and forth on this and misses the whole point. But it hardly has anything to do with the First Amendment. I think if people stick with the First Amendment, with the issue of property rights, you can sort most of these things out. But I think the basic problem that we have had for so long is that we have depended on the government for economic matters, medical care, and school. We believe that we have to take care of the whole world. And then when we come up with, an attack on our culture, and you have the culture of Marxism that stir the pot and want to undermine and cause chaos so people are more willing to sacrifice their liberty, that becomes a problem. And to me, the problem is they're playing on this whole idea of virtue. Well, people aren't being nice. They're saying mean things, and they're slandering people. They're doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and we have to come in and compensate for their impoliteness and them talking and saying hateful things. So they invite the government in. I think there's a problem there. But I think that if there's a problem with people being rude and ignorant, it's an individual problem, and it's not a government problem. If we ever turn the problem and the challenge of excellence and virtue to the government, believe me, when they get involved, they'll work hard at it, and every single thing they do will be a threat to liberty. This is what invites theocracies, because there's different theocrats will come in for different beliefs, and they say, well, we know we have all the answers on social opinions and spiritual life and all, and we will dictate it. That is the worst kind of a system, because the government takes over and they admit it. 100%, we're going to control this whole thing about what you should do to be virtuous and how you can work for perfection and become a more productive citizen. The government shouldn't do this. The government should be there in a very limited fashion, and that is to protect our liberties so that nobody does aggress against individuals that are doing something. They say, well, wouldn't this be totally chaos? Wouldn't people be doing anything they want? Sure, they would be. But believe me, if you're a businessman, you better do the right thing or you won't be in business long. And if it's a social thing, there's going to be a penalty to be paid. But if you go over the bounds of limits of lying, cheating, stealing, and hurting people, that's a different story. They don't have license to do that. So I still, even under these confusing and complex issues going on today about the right of free speech and hate crimes, I think that the answers are still the same. Live in a free society, limit the size and scope of government, get the government out of our lives, get the government out of the responsibility that they're to educate all our children. Just think of that and what they do, and look at the mess that we have now. Just think of the monopoly on the monetary system and look at the mess that we have now. Think of all the things that they've taken over. Think of when the worse the medical care system gets, the more government we get. Hopefully we've taken a step backward on that, but it is dependency on government that causes the problem, and so far up until now all they're asking for is more government. Sort of like a monetary system. You have economic problems coming from too much spending and too much inflation and too much government regulation. So what do? They come in and they spend more money and print more money and run up more debt. Instead of coming up with the right answer. So liberty is the answer, whether it's a social problem, an economic problem, or the disastrous effects of our foreign policy that's going on today. So the answers are there. Our traditions have taught it to us, but right now we've drifted a long way because we have been accused that truth is treasonous, whether we talk about our foreign policy or describe exactly what's happening in our system today. So all we need to do is get enough people to look toward liberty, and we will find our answers. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.